Holy flippin' smokes! Okay everyone, now that I've just blown your eardrums, I'm about to blow your mind. The Federal Reserve and the financial system is gaining more and more power. They're getting more and more wealthy and powerful, while the poor and the middle class are getting destroyed. This video I make is going to be one of the most important videos I ever make. It is literally an urgent public service announcement about how the Fed is gaining more and more power and is making people nervous. Because what you have to know is, through every crisis, through every war, the government, the financial system, the Federal Reserve is becoming ever more powerful. And we are at a critical point in time right now, with the Great Reset, with the digital dollar, and with digital IDs that will be coming, and social credit scores. And if we don't act now, if we don't stop them now, it'll literally change society forever. Okay, let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. Looky here, everyone. We're going to discuss a very important topic, and look at this article's headline, but we're going to go much deeper than that. It says here, the Fed keeps extending its powers, and that's making some people nervous, and you should definitely be nervous. And I have to admit, I've actually been a bit too conservative in my videos. There's a lot more that I want to share with you, and a lot more hidden secrets and scandals and behind the scenes, or how should I say, behind the curtain events that are happening that most people aren't aware about, and they don't know how corrupt this whole system is, which I'll be exposing in my next few videos. But first, people, I want to share with you a very, very powerful quote. And this was a prophecy from a great man, Thomas Jefferson. Everything he foretold us about would come is literally happening right before our eyes. And this is no longer a drill, people, anymore. It's no longer a game. You got to take this serious. And I quote, "If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations will grow up around them, will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. I believe that banking and institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. The issuing power should be taken away from the banks and restored to the people, to whom it properly belongs." Well, everyone, that quote is so flippin' powerful. And this quote literally is exactly what's happening right now. The banks are having boom bust cycles, inflation, deflation. They're increasing the money supply, then tightening the money supply to create boom bust cycles. And every boom bust cycle, they gain more power and more wealth. And we are being deprived of all our property. And if we don't stop now, they will own everything and we will own nothing. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. Back to the article. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm fired up today. I've been doing some deep research, and you're going to see some crazy videos I'll be releasing over the next week. So it says here, Wall Street has noticed the Fed is continuing to expand on its mandate of price control and full employment. Well, let's tackle these two mandates head on. First thing, price stability. What are we having right now? Rampant, rapid inflation that is getting worse, and they're not dealing with that. So that's complete BS. They don't want price stability. All they want is prices to keep going up so they can keep increasing the tax revenue for the government, so the government can repay the debt, so they can devalue the debt, and also they can keep increasing the money supply to buy real goods and services, make you pay tax on that, and then charge you interest. But just think of this, people. Say, for example, I created a currency and there was $1 billion created. And then I lent that $1 billion and I charged 10% interest. Where's that other 10% gonna come from? Think about it. They can't stop increasing the money supply because interest doesn't exist. They have to keep on creating more money to pay the interest. But we'll keep getting deeper here. Okay, now their second mandate, which they're kind of changing the tune here. Instead of going they want unemployment to be low, they're now saying we want full employment. But their definition of full employment is very different now. So what they're doing now with employment, they're using this as an excuse to keep printing money and keep devaluing the dollar and keep devaluing people's purchasing power by saying we want all minorities to be fully employed. But think of this, what they're doing is increasing the cost of food, housing, and utilities and transportation. Now the rich, food, housing, transportation, and utilities makes up a pretty small portion of their income. So if food prices go up, if gas prices go up, if house prices go up, it doesn't really affect them that much because that's a smaller portion of their income. But say for example, these minorities, the majority of their income is spent on food, housing, transportation, and utilities. And even for example, if we had zero unemployment, zero, but if the price of everything goes up, it doesn't matter if they've got a job paying them $15 an hour, just some crappy hospitality job, because they're not creating good jobs. Most of the jobs that are coming back are just temporary hospitality jobs or tourism jobs. Even if they get zero unemployment, people's standard of living is still going to go down because they're going to devalue purchasing power so much that even a full-time job won't be enough to support a family. You're going to have 2 people or couple working 2 full-time jobs. Remember, we've gone from a father being a sole provider and having, 5 kids in the 70s and 80s. It was pretty common to have 5 kids. To now we've got a couple with 1 child that is struggling to make ends meet. What's the trend going to be next? People are going to have multiple jobs, or we're going to have multi-generational living, which I don't think is a bad thing. That's what I do. We're going to have parents living with their kids and grandparents living with their grandkids just in order to survive. Alright, but now they've got new goals. It says here, over the past year, the central bank has taken on climate control and ensuring employment growth is spread evenly throughout society. Okay, so now let's tackle this climate control agenda they're now doing. Really, how can the Federal Reserve combat climate control? Well, I guess what they could do, instead of printing physical money, they now print digital dollars, so they're saving the trees there. But really, all I think this is just the Fed virtual signaling. But some people are getting pretty upset with the Federal Reserve because they're meant to be independent from the government and not get involved with the government's agendas. They're just meant to be focusing on banking here. So it says here the new agenda closely mirrors values from former Fed Chair and current Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. And what you have to know is, what we're having now is the banks. The bankers are getting more and more power, and they're getting more and more people from the banking sector into the US Treasury and into the US government. And really, what you have to know is, which I'll be going over in future videos, very, very in-depth, which will blow your mind, it's really the banks that are controlling the country and controlling the world. And if we looked at the last financial crisis, who was the Treasury Secretary then? It was Henry Paulson. Now, who is Henry Paulson? He's an ex-chief executive officer, CEO. The CEO of Goldman Sachs became the US Secretary of Treasury. And now you're having the ex-Federal Reserve Chair, which was the boss of the current Federal Reserve Chair, working together. Can't you see there's a big conflict of interest there? And a quote here says, "Since 2008, they've capitulated on so many fronts, I don't even recognize the institution anymore. The bank I worked for is gone," said Fed veteran Christopher Wallen. And of course, the Fed says, Fed officials stress their independence and insist they are not guided by political pressure. Well, you want to know something crazy that actually happened in 1933 and that I could see happening again with the current administration? Looky here, everyone. The president in 1933, so this is a summary here on the Federal Reserve website, actually completely overtook the Federal Reserve. They started issuing the currency, they started to become more in control of the US dollar and devaluing the dollar, and they confiscated everybody's wealth. If you had gold, you had 14 days to bring that to the government, and then they would take that real asset, that real money from you, and then they'll give you $20 of fake, just this fiat US dollar currency. And then guess what, how they did? When they brought up all the gold that they paid $20 for, you can fact check all this through Wikipedia. Then what they did is they then increased the price of gold to $35. So they nearly doubled the value. They just said, okay, we're going to tell you what gold's worth now. So they completely confiscated the US population's wealth. And this was not just that long ago, only 80 years ago. But we are now at the end. We're in the fourth turning. We're in a crisis mode. And I wouldn't be surprised, and I'll get into this in some other videos because we're running out of time here, if we do see another great wealth confiscation, because look how much debt there is and we haven't even entered another war yet. And we all know every time there's war, the deficits get completely out of control and taxes skyrocket. It says here, now the dynamic has gotten even more intense. Powell and Yellen, who worked together on the Fed for nearly 6 years, now run the Fed and the Treasury retrospectively. Look at these buddies here, they're planning how they can conquer the world. Just kidding. That's never happened before, and it's what has some on the street nervous that the Fed may be tasked with implementing the White House economic program. And like I said, what happened in 1933 when the US government Roosevelt completely overtook the Federal Reserve and got in charge of increasing the money supply, don't think that can't happen again. We're seeing a very aggressive administration here that wants to spend a lot of money, that wants to tax people a heck of a lot, and if anyone gets in the way, all they have to do is get permission from Congress, and with a stroke of a pen, they can create any law and do to the Fed whatever they want. And listen to this, everyone. English said he has concerns generally about the position the Fed might find itself in as the ever-escalating $28.3 trillion Federal Reserve government debt becomes more expensive to finance. So yes, imagine if inflation gets out of control and they have to lift interest rates up to 5%. How is the US government going to be able to afford to repay the debt? You know what they're going to do? They're going to skyrocket taxes. And what I'm worried about, and what it says here, is they're worried that when it comes time to tighten monetary policy, and that time will come, that there may be political pressure, said English, who is now a finance professor at Yale School of Management. I'm not sure it will be coming from Janet Yellen. She knows the rules of the interaction better than anybody, but there may well be political pressure on the Fed not to raise rates and not reduce the size of its balance sheet. Because what you have to understand, what the Fed is doing and why they're doing it and why they really don't want to taper is because they're pretty much monetizing the debt. And this is the Ponzi of the whole financial system. You've got the government here. They can't issue money. The Fed does. But what they can do is they create an IOU, a US Treasury. But no one really wants to buy treasuries right now, especially the 1 month, 2 month, and 3 months, because interest rates are pretty much zero. And people are thinking Fed may have to lift interest rates, which means bond prices will go down. So the US government needs the Fed to come in and buy those bonds, which is pretty much monetizing the debt. Now here's where things get a bit cray-cray. So the US government issues a bond, the Fed buys the bond from the US government, but you know what the Federal Reserve actually does is the US government pays interest to the Fed, but the Federal Reserve has to pay any excess, any profit the Federal Reserve makes, they have to pay back to the US Treasury. Okay, so looky here everyone. The Fed pays $88.5 billion to the Treasury in 2020. So not many people know this, but in excess of $10 billion. So what the Fed does is it pays its operating expenses, and you know what it does? It pays its members a 6% dividend, which I'll be getting into in another video. And after then paying that, any profits it makes, it pays back to the Treasury. So quickly summarize here to make it simple, because this is a complex subject, but put it very simple. The US government creates debt, sells it to the Fed charges the US government interest, but then the Fed pays that interest back to the US Treasury. So the US Treasury is barely paying any interest at all. And then the government uses that fake money, this fake fiat currency, after it already confiscated all the real wealth in 1933, it uses that money to buy you, to buy your time, to buy your skills, to buy your brain, to buy your innovation, to buy your precious time here on earth, the most important commodity that no one can ever get back, and buy up all the real hard assets and then tax you more. So why the heck are we paying so much tax when you can clearly see here they're creating money out of nowhere and paying pretty much no interest? Okay, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here. Focus, Michael. I'm getting too fired up here, people. Listen to this, people. This is crazy. But the concerns remain. After all, the Fed has joined the Network for Greening the Financial System, a group of global central banks aimed at addressing the impact climate change has on finance, indicating the efforts could be far-reaching. They're setting up for another Black Swan event, I'm telling you. I'm absolutely alarmed by what's happening inside the Eccles building where the Federal Reserve is headquartered. It's simply remarkable that the purview of scientists and politicians has made its way into central banking, said Danielle DiMartino Booth, which I'm a big fan of, head of Quill Intelligence and a former aide to ex-Dallas Fed President Richard Fisher. It is as if the Fed's officials are speaking out of both sides of their mouth now. And she added that Fed policies, even related to employment, have limits, and Jerome Powell knows that. Really, all this is, people, is virtual signaling. But now, I'm going to show something crazy and it's going to blow your mind. What the Federal Reserve actually did in 2020. They didn't just buy US Treasuries. They didn't just buy mortgage-backed securities. They completely bailed out the whole financial system, every little nook and cranny you can think of, and us, the taxpayers, are paying for it. You think we're not? We definitely are. We're paying for it by higher taxation, higher inflation, and debasement of the dollar. And here's just another powerful quote I quickly want to share with you. Give me control of a nation's money supply, and I care not who makes its laws. So said Mayer Amschel Rothschild, founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty. People, all these commercial banks and these central banks, it all goes back to a few very powerful families like the Rockefellers, like the Rothschilds, and JP Morgan. But again, going on a tangent, I'm going to be covering all that in future videos. So here is literally the laundry list. They've now got a laundry list of policies the Federal Reserve is doing. I'll quickly just run through this. This is what the Fed did in response to the 2020 market crash, when the markets completely melted down, the money markets were drained, and there was a huge panic, and the whole financial system almost completely collapsed. So first, the Federal Reserve obviously dropped interest rates to zero. And for with guidance, what they pretty much do, they just talk up the markets. They try to lift confidence, because really the only thing that's holding up the markets and the dollar is faith. Then obviously they did securities purchases, QE. Then they did lending to security firms through the primary dealer credit facility. So this is something that most people don't know about. It says here, a program reviewed from global financial crisis, the Fed offered low interest rates, currently 0.25%, loans of up to 90 days, to 24 large financial institutions known as primary dealers. So again, they bailed out all the big financial institutions. You can see here, they give them cheap credit. And why do you think institutions are buying up all the homes right now, while Wall Street's buying up all your homes? Because they can get this cheap credit at 0.25% and afford to pay these stupid prices for houses, because they're getting free money to do it. And mum and dad investors and people just wanting to buy a home, they can't compete. And they're buying the homes before they even come on the market in the tens of thousands. Again, another facility backstopping money market mutual funds. The Fed also relaunched the crisis area money market mutual fund liquidity facility, MMLF. They've pretty much got every letter in the alphabet here. This is a facility which lent to banks against collateral they purchase from the prime money market funds, the one that invests in corporate short-term IOUs known as commercial paper, which is pretty much just junk bonds. Obviously, we know what they did in the repo market operations, which is now getting crazy in the reverse repo market operations. They did direct lending to banks, so the Fed lowered the rate it charged banks from loans from its discount window by 2%. So they dropped the interest rate so these banks can get this cheap money from 2.25% to 0.25%. It also relaxed the requirements for banks, so the banks, they didn't have to hold any cash reserves at all, zero reserves. So if you tried to get your money out, and if you try this today, you won't be able to get your money out. But it wasn't just the banks they bailed out. They did direct lending to major corporation employees. So the big corporations got a bailout, but the mum and dad pub shops, the restaurants, the cafes, the small businesses, they can't tap this lending facility by the Fed. But these major corporations, not just the banks, they got loans from the Fed as well. This was in a significant step beyond its crisis-era programs, which focused mainly on financial market functioning. The Fed on March the 23rd, 2020, established two new facilities, which you probably haven't heard about, to support highly rated US corporations, the Primary Market Corporation Credit Facility, PMCCF. So again, more letters of the alphabet being used here. And this is just showing you how much power the Federal Reserve is getting. I hope it's waking you up. They're literally bailing out everything. They're taking control of the whole country here, people. They also support loans to non-profit institutions, so they gave money there. The Fed on March 23rd, 2020 restarted the Crisis Era Term Asset-Backed Securities Loan Facility, TALF. Through this facility, the Fed supported lending to household consumers and small businesses by lending to holders of asset-backed securities collateralized by new loans. These loans included, guess what? They bailed out the student loans market, the auto market, credit card loans, and loan guaranteed by the SBA. In a step beyond the Crisis Era program, the Fed expanded eligible collateral to include existing mortgage-backed securities, so they're not just buying residential mortgage-backed securities, they're now buying commercial mortgage-backed securities. And this is all the Fed has to do, people. All the Fed has to do is invoke this, the Fed Reserve Act Section 13.3, and receive permission from the Treasury and Congress, and then they can take a little bit of money from Congress and then leverage that to 10, and they can go and buy anything they want. So in the next financial crisis, we could see, don't put it past them, the Federal Reserve buying individual stocks to save the stock market. All it needs to do is activate that Section 13.3 and get permission from the Treasury to do it. They also did direct lending to states. States ran out of money by bailing out the state government bond market, it says here. And if that wasn't enough to bail out the whole US, they bailed out pretty much the entire world. Listen to this. What you have to know is the Federal Reserve has international swap lines with other central banks. Using another tool that was important during the Great Recession, the Fed is making US dollars available to other central banks so they can lend to banks that need them. The Fed gets foreign currencies in exchange and charges interest on the swap, so it swaps dollars for foreign currency and it gets paid interest. 5 foreign central banks have permanent swap lines with the Fed, and the Fed has cut the rate it charges on those swaps with central banks in Canada, England, the Eurozone, Japan, and Switzerland. But what you have to know is, during 2020, they extended these swap lines facilities to many other central banks. So again, they didn't just bail out America, they bailed out the entire world. And they extended the maturity of those swaps, and it also extended the temporary swaps to central banks of Australia, where I'm at, Brazil, Denmark, Korea, Mexico, New Zealand, Norway, Singapore, and Sweden on December 16, 2020. And the Fed has extended these temporarily swaps until September 30, 2021. So it'll be very interesting what happens after September 30th in the global economy if they do stop these swaps. And it wasn't just them. The Fed is also offering dollars to central banks that don't have established swap lines through a new repo facility called FEMA for Foreign and International Monetary Authority. The Fed will make overnight dollar loans to the central banks, taking the US Treasury debt as collateral. This facility was extended along with the temporarily swap lines through September 30th, 2021. So it wasn't just those other central banks. Anybody that needs dollars, come to the Fed. We'll give you whatever you want. Okay guys, I have to stop there. There's still so much I want to share with you. There's still so much that I've been learning about and found out about this financial system that I will be sharing with you over the next week. But can you see the laundry list of new facilities the Federal Reserve is doing now? They haven't just taken over the Treasury market and the mortgage-backed security market. They've taken over every single corner, nook and cranny of the financial system. They bailed everything out at the expense of the taxpayer, at the expense of your hard-earned money. You're now going to work for a year for 20% less in real terms than you were last year because of what the Fed's doing. Okay, that was a wild one, guys. I know it's a bit long, but I had to share this with you. And I'm going to be sharing some things that I'm literally terrified to share. But enough is enough. And it's time to speak up, and it's time to expose how corrupt this whole financial system is. Now, for all my loyal viewers and subscribers still watching, you're awesome. If you haven't already, please tap that like and subscribe button. I'll keep you up to date on exactly what's happening in the financial system. And if you're bored, I'll put up some other videos here. I'll see you there.